There's just one God, ma'am, and he doesn't dress like that. Hello, my name is Marie Mullaney, and this is Just in Time World. Today, I would like to discuss monotheism in a fantasy world. I'm going to break down today's topic into models of monotheism, expanding religions and what they mean in a fantasy setting, why monotheistic gods should ideally be remote, and finally, how to use a monotheistic god to drive your plot in a fantasy setting. If you like this kind of content, please do hit the thumbs up button. It helps ensure that the algorithm doesn't just bury the content. And if you really like it, you can buy me a cup of coffee over at coffee.com/justintimeworlds, link on the whiteboard. Okay, let's get cracking. First, let's talk about the models of monotheism. There are in fact more than just one model of monotheism. The one that we're all familiar with, I'm sure, is there is only one God. Every other god is false, and this one's the only real one. It's the one that is most common now in the current day and age. But it wasn't the only one previously, and it's certainly not the only model that can exist in a fantasy world. You can also have a model of the strongest god. Now, how this works is there are other gods, but they are weaker than my awesome monotheistic god, and everybody should just worship my awesomely strong god. This model is somewhat related to henotheism, which is when one adheres to one god out of a pantheon or one god out of a whole suite of gods, because they are the only one that you relate to. So you admit the existence of the others. They might even be stronger than your God, but your God is the only one that you worship. There is the concept of a pantheon all in one. So this is when you say that other races might have pantheons, but we only need one God. This is weirdly illustrated in D&D by there being an elvish god and a dwarvish god. Humans can have a pantheon, but elves would have one god that fulfills all of their religious needs in one, as opposed to having a whole pantheon of gods. As I said, most often the monotheism we see is there is only one god. This often results in expanding religions. So what is an expanding religion? An expanding religion is one that allows conversion. Not all religions allow for conversion. Some religions are intrinsically tied to your heritage, and you would only be part of that religion if you were born into it. But there are religions that do allow for conversion, and those religions are expanding religions. Now, these expanding religions have got two very interesting consequences. The first is the clash of two expanding religions. We saw this very clearly in our history in the Crusades, where we had the clash of Islam and Christianity over the city of Jerusalem. That kind of religious war is often a titanic struggle, and it can provide infinite plot opportunities in a fantasy world. The other consequence of expanding religions is faith at the point of a sword. So what happens here is there is a forced conversion of people. And I don't here restrict it only to physical violence, although that is one method to force people to convert. There is also forcing people through taxation privileges, or forcing people through things like slavery. In researching this, I read a fascinating article, which I'll link below, to taxation and how Islam used it in Egypt in order to convert the Egyptians to Islam in the early portion of the Islamic expansion. Link down below. It's a great read, but it is very technical, so because it's somebody's doctoral thesis. Any kind of forceful conversion will result in an exchange of religious ideas. What I mean by that is quite often that kind of forceful conversion will result in the religion that is being absorbed becoming part of the absorbing religion by means of turning those gods that are absorbed into elements of the absorbing religion. And that's how we ended up with religions like Santeria, which you find in Cuba, where the Orisa pantheon are seen as saints of the Christian faith, because the Yoruba people were forcefully converted when they were taken to America as slaves, and they ended up bringing their religion into Christianity as saints, as part of the host that supports the deity. Now, this kind of faith at the point of a sword and the kind of expanding religions is also often possible because your God is remote and you're left with human interpretation of religious writings, right? Because the God doesn't often come down and visit and directly express their will. Is that a good thing in a fantasy setting? Or do you want a monotheistic God who directly interferes? The reason why you ideally want the God to be remote in a fantasy setting if it's a monotheistic God is because you have extremely concentrated power if it's a single God. If it's an actual single God. So it's not like this is the strongest God or this is the only one that these people adhere to. If you say that this is the only God, that God holds enormous power, especially if they are also the creator of the universe. So if they are a direct stick their fingers into the pie and interfere with things God, you're going to end up with people being unable to go against the God. So ideally you want that creator to be a more remote figure so that you can have schisms, misinterpretation. You should also bear in mind that a monotheistic God, if it's the only God, will end up being a little schizophrenic. And the reason why is because you're going to be answering all of your big questions and mediating all of your social contracts with one entity. That means that one entity both advocates for peace and agitates for war, sometimes in the same sentence. Yeah? This is going to lead to conflict, which leads me into how to use a remote God. So now you've got these very different perspectives on the God, where you've got the peaceful side of the God saying, make peace with your neighbors, and you have the warlike side of the God saying, wipe them all out. So what happens is you start developing different schisms and sects, and you start having human misinterpretation, and that human misinterpretation leads to conflict, and conflict leads to great plots and fantastic stories. So having that remote God, which is a little bit schizophrenic because it's fulfilling all things to all people, results in you being able to use the God to really drive the story by having massive misinterpretation. You can also very effectively use the no true Scotsman fallacy, which is where you have people saying, my interpretation is the correct one, your interpretation is wrong. And that kind of conflict obviously can escalate all the way up to war. So when you're building your monotheistic God, things that you want to think about is, how does the God's schizophrenic relationship affect his worshippers? How is the host around the God formed? Is the God an expanding religion that absorbed other faiths, and they now form a host of minor gods or saints or angels that support the main God in the religion? What schisms exist? What politics exist around those schisms, and have there been any reformations of the religion to cause additional tension? What are the politics inside the church in terms of selecting a leader? Are there hierarchical leadership structures? Monotheism lends itself to organization, and if you want some more details on how to create an organized religion, check out my video on the topic. So really put some effort into the politics that surround a monotheistic religion, emphasizing your remote Godhead, which gives your humans, or your whatever race they are, the opportunity for misunderstandings, politics, and plot lines. And that is my take on monotheism in a fantasy world. My name is Marie. This has been Just in Time Worlds. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week for animism and totemism in a fantasy world.